Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachos, page 60b. This is unusual because I usually stop right at the top of the next Amud, but in this case I went a few lines into it, several lines into it perhaps, a good amount into it, more than usual, let's put it that way, a few lines into it. Because it was all one idea, I didn't want to stop. It was like one of those things where it says Chazar Hadin, and then it goes Lo Rizek, Rizeh. It was like, this is not like that, that's not like this. It's a pretty common recurring pattern throughout the Shas. But it says Malat Sada Shavash Behen. So anyway, my point is that it's a few lines into it now. We're holding by Rabbi Shimon Omer. That's what we're holding on 60b of Menachos. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Vehevesa. Rabbi Shimon Omer Vehevesa LeRabbi Pinchas Omer LeAgosho V'cheinu Omer Vehevesa Mesa Omer Reishis Ketzirchem LaKohen. V'yikrivu LeRabbi Pinchas LeAgosho V'cheinu Omer V'yikrivu Yisrael LeMizbeach. Rabbi Shimon adds, I wanted to get that real, like the Israeli Litvish Yeshivish energy. That's if you notice, that's what I'm trying to capture here. That Israeli Yeshivish, like a Panovich person reading it. Rabbi Shimon Omer, V'yiveisu LeRabbi Pinchas Omer. The real Litvish, the real Litvak energy. I really want to capture that. I like that vibe. I'm trying to really get the nitzoitzis, the sparks out of that energy. I don't know how many people are really harvesting that energy. I think it's very important. And there's a lot of holy nitzoitzis there to help bring Mashiach, actually, Dafke. To help bring Mashiach Tzidkenu, Dafke. So anyway, the point is that's why I'm reading it that way, in case you were wondering. If any of y'all were wondering. Rabbi Shimon adds to the logical inference and says that the other cases are included in the derivation from the verse as the term, and you shall bring, serves to include the Omer meal offering and the requirement of bringing near to the altar. And so the verse states with regard to the Omer meal offering, then you shall bring the Omer, the first of your harvest, to the priest. Leviticus 23:10. Furthermore, it shall be drawn near, and it shall be drawn near, the verse says, it shall be drawn near, serves to include the meal offering brought by a sota in the requirement of bringing near. And so the verse states with regard to the meal offering brought by a sota, and draw it near to the altar, Numbers 5:25. Vidinhu. Vidinhu. The Braita challenges this. Vidinhu, let this be learned by a Kal V'chomer. Vidinhu, ma minchas choyte sheinu tuna hagasha, minchas choyte shetuna tenupa, ina din shetuna hagasha, ma minchas choyte shekem bayin chitin. The Braita challenges, but this halacha is capable of being derived a fortiori by logical inference. And if the meal, and this is it, and if the meal offering of a sinner, which includes a lenient aspect, as it does not require waving, nevertheless requires bringing near, then with regard to the meal offering brought by a sota, which does require waving, is it not logical to conclude that it should require bringing near? The Braita rejects this logical inference, as there is a stringency that applies to the meal offering of a sinner, which does not apply to the meal offering brought by a sota. What is notable about the meal offering of a sinner? It is notable in that it comes from wheat, whereas the meal offering brought by a sota comes from barley, an inferior product. Minchas oimer toichiach, uma minchas ma leminchas oimer. She came to an Hashem and Levoina, minchas choyte tochiach. The Braita responds The Omer meal offering can prove that this factor is not decisive, as it also comes from barley, and yet it requires bringing near. Therefore, the same should apply to the meal offering brought by Sota. The Braita rejects this claim. What is notable about the meal offering? It is notable in that it requires oil and frankincense, whereas the meal offering brought by a sota does not. The Braita answers the meal offering of a sinner can prove that the requirement of oil and frankincense is not a decisive factor, as the meal offering of a sinner does not require oil and frankincense, and yet it requires bringing near. The Chazar Hadin lo yirize kirize, velo yirize kirize. Atzad Hashosh behen shishav legemitza v'shav legosho. Afani ovi min chasoite shishavos lehen legemitza tishaveh lehen leagosho. Consequently, the inference has reverted to its starting point. The Chazar Hadin ayayay. The inference has reverted to its starting point. And the aspect of this case is not like the aspect of that case, and the aspect of that case is not like the aspect of this case. Their common element is that both the Omer meal offering and the meal offering of a sinner are equal with regard to the requirement of the removal of a handful, and they are equal with regard to the requirement of bringing near. I will also bring the additional case of the meal offering brought by Isota, which is equal to them with regard to the requirement of the removal of a handful, and conclude it should be likewise equal to them with regard to the requirement of bringing near. Okay. Yeah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer v'veisel harabois minchas soite leagosho v'chein oimer v'hevies korban aleho. It was stated that Rabbi Shimon derives from the term "and you shall bring" Leviticus 2:8, written in the context of the deep pan meal offering, that the Omer meal offering is included in the requirement of bringing near. Conversely, Rabbi Yehuda says the term "and you shall bring" serves to include the meal offering brought by a sota and the requirement of bringing near. And so, the verse states, with regard to the meal offering brought by a sota, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest, and shall bring her offering for her 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. He shall pour no oil upon it, nor give frankincense upon it, for it is a meal offering of jealousy, a meal offering of memorial, bringing iniquity to remembrance. Numbers 5:15. Avo minchas oimer lo yitzchak kol my time of Medina lo yakasio. Uma minchas chodesh she'ena te'una d'tnufa hagasho. Minchas oimer she'te'una t'nufa eno din she'te'una hagasho. But with regard to the Omer meal offering, a verse is not needed to teach that it requires bringing near. The right to ask, what is the reason that no verse is needed for the Omer meal offering? It is because this halacha is derived a fortiori by a logical inference. And if the meal offering of a sinner, which includes a lenient aspect, as it does not require waving, nevertheless requires bringing near, then with regard to the Omer meal offering, which includes a stringent aspect, and it does require waving, is it not logical to conclude that it should require bringing near? Mala minchas chodesh shekain boy nechitin minchas soite tochiach mal minchas soite shekain bo levorer avoin demeskeres avoini minchas soite tochiach. The Braita rejects this inference. What is notable about the meal offering of a sinner? It is notable in that it comes from wheat, whereas the Omer meal offering comes from barley. The Braita responds, the meal offering brought by a sota can prove that this factor is not decisive, as it comes from barley, and yet it requires bringing near. The same should apply to the Omer meal offering. The Braita rejects this claim. What is notable about the meal offering brought by a sota? It is notable in that it comes to clarify whether or not the wife committed the transgression of adultery, as it is described with the phrase, bringing iniquity to remembrance. Maskeres avoin. Whereas the Omer meal offering does not come to clarify whether or not one transgressed. The Braita answers, the meal offering of a sinner can prove otherwise, as it does come to clarify transgression. As it does not come to clarify transgression. Okay, the Braita answers, the meal offering of a sinner can prove otherwise, as it does not come to clarify transgression, and yet it requires bringing near. V'chazar hadin, and it will go back and forth. V'chazar hadin, it shall go back and forth. Ay. Lo rizeh k'rizeh, ולא יריזק ריזק, שהשווה שבהן, שכן שבו לקמיצה ושבו לגשה, אף אני אבי מלחס העומר, ששווה להן לקמיצה, תשווה להן להגשה. Okay, therefore the inference has reverted to its starting point, as the aspect of this case is not like the aspect of that case, and the aspect of that case is not like the aspect of this case. Their common element is that both the meal offering brought by a sota and the meal offering of a sinner are equal with regard to the requirement of the removal of a handful, and they are equal with regard to the requirement of bringing near. I will also bring the additional case of the Omer meal offering, which is equal to them with regard to the requirement of the removal of a handful, and conclude that it should likewise be equal to them with regard to the requirement of bringing near. In this manner, the requirement of bringing the Omer meal offering near to the altar is derived jointly from the meal offering brought by a sota and the meal offering of a sinner. Umay parachto Rabbi Shimon parich hachi ma litzad hashava shebehen shekein mitzuyin. The Gemara asks, and how would you refute this logical inference? In other words, there is no refutation of this claim, and it is therefore unclear why it was necessary for Rabbi Shimon to derive the requirement of bringing near concerning the Omer meal offering from the term "and you shall bring." The Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon refutes the claim in this manner. What is notable about the common element of the meal offering brought by a sota and the meal offering of a sinner? It is notable in that they are common offerings, meaning they can be brought many times over the course of a year, whereas the Omer offering is sacrificed only once a year. But Rabbi Yehuda, Adraba, Hametzuya Tefei, Hanach Zimnin, Dino Mishkachas Leklal. The Gemara asks, and how does Rabbi Yehuda respond to this claim? He maintains that this is not a valid refutation, as, on the contrary, this Omer meal offering is more common than the meal offering brought by a sota and the meal offering of a sinner. The Omer meal offering is definitely brought once a year, whereas in the case of these offerings, there may be times when you do not find it at all, if no poor sinners come forward and no women are accused of adultery by their husbands. O Eino Omer vehevesa ela shiachim nisnadiv umevi mincha chees chutz milishminyan. The Gemara cites a Braita, or perhaps when the verse states, "and you shall bring," this does not serve to teach about the requirement of bringing near, but rather it is written for a different reason, to indicate that an individual Jew may donate and bring a different kind of meal offering, one made from barley, apart from these 5 meal offerings, all made from wheat, which the verse mentions with regard to this matter. See Leviticus 2, 1 through 13. The fire offerings are the same fine flour meal offering, the meal offering prepared in the pan, the meal offering prepared in the deep pan, the meal offering baked in the oven, either in the form of loaves or in the form of wafers. V'dinhu tzibur mevi mincha min achitin chova maybe mincha min ha'oirin chova av yachid, maybe mincha min achitin nedava yochel yavi mincha min ha'oirin nedava tamid lomar eile eini ela eile. This halakha is necessary because the opposite conclusion could otherwise have been derived by logical inference based on juxtaposition. The community brings an obligatory meal offering from wheat, meaning the 2 loaves brought on the festival of Shavuot, and the community also brings an obligatory meal offering from barley, the Omer meal offering. So too, an individual who brings a meal offering from wheat as a voluntary gift offering can likewise bring a meal offering from barley as a voluntary gift offering. Therefore, to prevent this inference, the verse states, "And you shall bring the meal offering that is made of these to the Lord," Leviticus 2, verse 8, which teaches, "I have nothing other than these 5 meal offerings as individual meal offerings." Eino omer ele ela leomer hare olai mincho shemevi chamishton tamid lomar me'ele rotzo achas mevi rotzo chamishton mevi. The Braita raises a difficulty, or perhaps the verse states these not in order to exclude other individual meal offerings, but rather to teach a halacha with regard to one who takes a vow to bring a meal offering and says, "It is incumbent upon me to bring a meal offering," without specifying a particular type of meal offering, and it teaches that he must bring all 5 of them. The Braita explains the verse states of these, which indicates that if the one who took a vow wants, he brings 1 meal offering, and if he wants, he brings all 5 of them. Rabbi Shimon Omer Esa Mincha, the Rabbi Shal Menachot, going Minchas Goyim, Minchas Noshim, Le'agosho Yochol Shani Marviach, Shtei Alechem Elechem Aponim Tamid Lo Mamele. The Braita continues. Rabbi Shimon says, when the verse states the meal offering of Leviticus 2:8, this serves to include the other meal offerings, for example, the meal offering of Gentiles, the meal offering brought by women, with regard to the requirement of bringing near. One might have thought that I should include from this verse even the 2 loaves and the showbread. Therefore, the verse states of these, which indicates that not all meal offerings are included in the requirement of bringing near. The Raisa asks, and what did you see that led you to include the other meal offerings in the requirement of bringing near, and to exclude the 2 loaves and the showbread from this halacha? One could suggest the opposite conclusion, to include these 2 offerings while excluding the others. The Braita answers, I include the other meal offerings as there is a portion of them burned in the fire of the altar, and I exclude the 2 loaves and the showbread from the requirement of bringing near, as there is no portion of them burned in the fire on the altar. Rather, they are eaten by the priests in their entirety. Or brackets to hey. The Braita asks, but with regard to the meal offering brought with libations, which is entirely burned in the fire, by this logic, one might have thought that it should require bringing near. The Braita answers, the verse states, and you shall bring the meal offering that is made of these to the Lord, and it shall be drawn near to the priest, and he shall bring it near to the altar. Leviticus 2, verse 8. This includes that the requirement of bringing near applies only to those meal offerings listed in this chapter, not to the meal offering brought with libations, which is not mentioned. The Braita asks, but didn't you already derive from the term "and it shall be drawn near" that the meal offering brought by a sotam is included in the requirement of bringing near? The Braita answers, as the verse could have stated, "and shall be drawn near," and instead it states, "and it shall be drawn near." This and shall be drawn near. It says, "and it shall be drawn near." The verse could have stated, "and shall be drawn near," but it said, "and it shall be drawn near." The additional "it," that word, this addition serves to exclude the meal offering brought with libations from the requirement of bringing near. The bride asked, and what did you see that led you to include the other meal offerings in the requirement of bringing near, and to exclude the meal offering brought with libations from this requirement? Okay, to be continued.